Hello, everyone, and welcome to Office Hours. It's Thursday, video day. We'll be talking about lenses in our second hour, but of course, all tech questions are always fair game here at Office Hours, because this is where we answer all of your questions about media and production 24/7. If you're watching on YouTube, you can enter questions using the QR code or simply going to askofficehours.global. So if you have things you're curious about, use that URL and you'll be able to slip your questions into the queue. Right now, it's time for your questions, so let's dive in. Alexander, what do our viewers and listeners have on their minds today?
Our first question today is from Sean Johnson in New York. Good morning. I'm testing Zoom ISO outputting same Zoom participant via NDI and SDI. Same resolution. NDI looks noticeably sharper. SDI looks okay, just significantly less sharp in comparison. Seems odd. Any thoughts as to why this is? Thanks.
Let's start with Jeff Keithley. Jeff.
Well, I made sure that I got my hand on this one very first. It's sharper very specifically because it's better, because NDI is better than SDI. And so that's why it's sharper. Alex, would you agree?
Probably not. So I think NDI is great. I think that there's got to be more going on here. So we'd have to know how are you sending the SDI out and how are you bringing it back in? I don't think that the SDI should necessarily look any sharper than the NDI. They probably are very similar, but if the SDI looks, there's a lot of advantages to NDI, but sharpness over SDI is not usually one of them. So there could be something. So again, I think that the NDI is a very valid way to do it, and there's a lot of convenience to it, and there's a lot of power to NDI. But I think that if your SDI is looking not as sharp as your NDI, there might be some other things going on in your pipeline. So how are you sending it out, and how are you bringing it back in? So I would take a look at those things before I'd have to know a little bit more about your pipeline to understand that process.
I would agree about the pipeline. That's the important part that was kind of left out. Just saying SDI is not truly indicative of exactly all the steps that the color space is going through, everything that's being done. Definitely need a little bit more information to be able to really qualified answer, other than it's just better.
Hopefully that gives you some areas to look into. Sean, let's move on to our next question.
Our next question is from Andy Kokendorfer in Viera, Florida. What is your list to prepare a Zoom meeting and Zoom user settings for live production?
Let's start with Jeff Keithley again. Jeff.
I haven't done a few Zoom meetings over the last few years. Everybody really kind of has their own way of doing that list. We work with a lot of different clients that are in the self-help space and I guess you would call it the coaching space, the offer space. And each one of those are a little bit different, but they're similar but different. So it kind of depends on the meeting itself. So our checklist really varies a lot between those. The number one thing is it used to be always make sure that original audio is on. Now we don't do that as often. It's really about making sure that we qualify those people. If they're panelists, we qualify them ahead of time. We make sure we go through, we work with them and make sure their framing's right, make sure their audio is correct. But then the actual Zoom user settings for all the guests, all the people that are attending the events, because we're not using webinars most of the time, we're using Zoom meetings. And Zoom meetings, we want to make sure that they can't share, for instance. We want to make sure there's other things that are turned on or off, like renaming themselves because the system itself is renaming them. We're using Obvio a lot of times going in. So we have a pretty long list. I'll be glad to share it with you if you want to ping me directly on Discord of some of our common lists. But they're really, it just depends really on the event and all the settings that you need to have for that set event and the people that are attending.
Alexander Knight.
Yeah, more along the lines of Jeff, too. I don't necessarily always start with the Zoom settings. Prepping the guests is key. So just, I start with internet bandwidth. What's their bandwidth like? Are they on Wi-Fi? Can we get them on a wired connection? And then from there, basically, I start with audio as the most important thing, then move to lighting and camera and stuff like that. Then we look at Zoom settings now, more along the lines of what Jeff said, too, with original sound on or off. It really depends. I just use my ears. I start with how do they sound right now with the stock settings? And if they sound pretty good, we'll probably leave it there. Otherwise, I'll go in. Now Zoom has if you're using the Zoom client, that is, there is now a remote control feature where you can request access and you can actually see what camera are they using, what audio interface are they using, do they have original sound for musicians and high fidelity music mode turned on. So those are pretty cool tools built into the Zoom client, which allow you to check that. And hopefully those features like the remote connection app, hopefully that makes its way through the API, because it'd be nice to be able to do that through Mimo Live or through Zoom ISO to be able to remotely check those settings there. So that's something that I'm waiting for.
And Alex Lindsay.
Yeah. There's prepping the guest is probably the number one thing that we do, that we work on there. And so same list that Alex listed out, which is that the first thing we want to do is make sure they've got a wired internet connection to a connection that's fast enough to make it work. The second thing is that we want to make sure that they have good audio. So we're going to try to move things around. We're going to try to get them a good mic, or have them. We usually recommend them a mic that's going to work in their environment. The next thing down is then lighting, and then camera, and then background. As we look at their Zoom settings, again, we do like to have the option to make sure that original audio can be turned on and they can test it. But like Alex, we kind of listen to what that looks like. If we're going to do this for post-production, or we're going to do some cleanup in post-production, then we'll have a tendency to not. We want to generally use original audio, because our cleanup tools gives us more to grab onto. If we're going to do it live to straight to YouTube, or live to the video, and the most important thing is the event, then oftentimes we will lean away from original audio and use some of Zoom's tools to make that possible. Internally, the things that we're working on is that I don't really do a lot of shows without Zoom ISO. So in fact, I don't know if I do any shows without Zoom ISO. I'm not really interested in screen scraping. And so we, there's a pipeline of making sure that we're getting the videos out that we expect, that we're getting the audio out as we expect it to, so that, we're going through those checklists to make sure that we're getting the data that we want. I had an event yesterday where it was six outputs out of Zoom ISO. And so we're trying to make sure that all of those are where they need to be, and kind of test it inside of our editing system to make sure that we're able to bounce around and see all those bits and pieces. And so those are some of the things that we look at. We're looking at our own bandwidth, of course, and trying to make sure that that we've got the bandwidth, that we have those things. Of course, how are we streaming it? Are we putting it back into the Zoom event, or are we putting it into another one? The best way, in my opinion, if you're going to have people speaking and you're going to reintroduce it into the event, is to have them in a breakout room or another Zoom, and then bring that in as a show. And then the key is to figure out how you're going to build a two-way connection between the room that the participants are in and them, if you want to have a two-way conversation. I will admit, it's very rare for me to do a show where unmanaged Zoom participants speak. That's not really my MO. I've done it a couple times, but out of over 2,000 events, I've probably done it 5 or 6 times, and I regretted it every single time. Their audio is just horrible. So as a viewer, I think it sucks a lot of energy out of the room. so that to have people, and they're on for so many reasons, the way that they present themselves, the quality of their connection, all the answer and noise. You have this great event, everyone feels a certain way, and then you open up the mic and it just goes out. so if I haven't prepped people, we do bring people in, but we usually say, okay, these are the 10 people that can talk. Everyone else is not going to be doing that. And so that's how we kind of, and then we do the best we can with them.
Alexander, do you want to get back in on this?
Yeah, and actually, this question is directly at Alex too. Part of the prep process, because that remote desktop access feature is only in the Zoom client. Do you ever find yourself remoting into their computer? I'm curious what tools you use, because I find just walking, if I have to verbally tell someone click on settings, click on preference, it's very hard to walk through their settings that way, as opposed to, and I haven't done remote desktop into the for some of the shows that we do, we actually send them a Mac Mini, so that's really easy because it's our Mac Mini. so we remote into our own machine. But what I do is because I have another, I can cut to my. I can't cut to it right now, but I can cut to my screen. I can sit there and walk them through it, and I have a telestrator. So I circle, see this thing down in the corner? Go ahead and click on that, and then move this up over here. And so because I have a way to cut to things and illustrate them, it's pretty easy for me to show it. We haven't had. I guess we've done it so many times. I don't think about it very much. It's something that we do pretty quickly, and I don't. We've prepped. Between Pixel Core and 090, we prepped over 6,000 people. So it's something you get kind of used to, how to be particular about, or how to be
precise about what you're asking for is really the thing that makes the most difference.
Jeff Keithley, you want to get back in?
Yeah, we use the actual screen share capabilities of Zoom. So we have them share their screen, and then we request remote control of that screen if we need to go through things quickly, or they're just neophytes and they just don't understand how to press a settings button. If they can get their screen shared, Alexander, you can actually request remote control through the Zoom client itself. And we're always doing that.
And I have to admit that for a lot of the guests that we have, they would never let us screen share their computer. Like, they would just never let us have access to it. Like, so that's the challenge that we have.
All right, let's move on to the next question.
Next question is from Douglas Carmichael. I changed the pixel aspect ratio to 1.25 in Resolve after importing clips from the BMD camera app, and they now appear in proper 16:9. Is this a common issue? And there's a YouTube video there.
Alex, have you run into that before?
No, I think that. So here's the footage that he's talking about, and now you have letterboxing up here. So this is stretched, and everything feels like it's stretched out. So I don't think that this is the solution for what you're doing. I think you just throw this footage away and capture another set of footage that is, and test it and make sure that what's coming out of that camera. I don't know what setting that you had there, but I think that you're now in a place where, what I would do is I would take something that I know is square, I put it in front of the camera, I'd capture it and figure out what the what's going on there. I can't even think of a setting in a Blackmagic camera that would get you something. The last one that you posted looked like 16:9 on YouTube, so I'm not sure exactly what was going on there, but I don't know how you got there. But I would, if it was me, I wouldn't spend any time trying to figure this out. I would say this is what I need to do now is take my camera, shoot it at something that I know is square straight onto the camera, look at the footage and figure out what's going on. And I would spend half a day trying to figure this out. But I've never seen what you're looking at, and I've had these Blackmagic cameras pretty much since they started shipping. And so I don't know how you're getting that setting, but I would reset the camera and then I would go out and shoot and just see what you get and see if it fixes it. Trying to fix this footage, I mean, you might be able to figure it out, but because it's nature, it's really hard to tell what's stretched and what isn't. That looks stretched. Like this looks stretched to me. It doesn't look correct. You've got letterboxing up here and down here. So it's too stretched out now. Anyway, so I would give that footage up and take it as a lesson that you need to, every time you have a new camera, you need to shoot some test footage before you go out and shoot anything that you want to keep.
Yeah, I'm just going to make one other comment. For me, the Blackmagic camera settings, those little rectangles that let you set so many different types of resolutions and screen aspect ratios, is one part of the issue, learning what those mean and how they affect what the footage is going to actually look like. The other thing is whatever you're monitoring by. If you're using the Blackmagic camera's internal flip-out screen or the back screen before the flip-outs, that's one thing, but if you're outputting it to any other monitor in your NLE or something like that, your monitor settings are also going to depend on how things look on the outside. So there's really a two-stage process. You want to get the camera set right, and whatever monitoring solution you're going to use day by day, you want to get right. And it's a little more difficult these days because every laptop has its own aspect ratio and number of pixels, width and height, and they're all over the place. So I agree with Alex 100%. This is something you should test and make sure that your workflow, this is I think why they coined that term, your workflow from camera to your edit system and out to the public is 100% understood by you before you go any farther. Let's go on to the next question.
Paul Walhus in Austin, Texas asks, $3,000 for an M4 Apple iPad Pro, 13-inch M4 iPad Pro, $1,299, 2 terabytes of storage, $1,000, Nano-texture glass, $100, Cellular, $200, Apple Pencil Pro, $129, Magic Keyboard, $349. Worth it or not?
Who's going to be the first to say that depends? Let's start with Alexander Knight.
Thanks, Paul. You always manage to keep me awake in the morning. Is it worth it or not? Well, almost anything is worth it if you have a need that can only be fulfilled by the feature set of that particular product. So I would get really introspective here and ask yourself, what am I doing that can only be met by, like, what am I doing that it can only be met by the needs of or the feature set of that iPad Pro? So if you're going to buy the biggest, most expensive iPad Pro with the fastest processor with the most RAM, are you editing multiple timelines of 4K video? Do you want the biggest surface area because you're really into art and you like using the Apple Pencil, and that is something that's really fantastic. So I guess the question is, what are you going to be using it for? And I would really think hard about that.
Nigel DeSalle.
If you're about to do $1 million show, Paul, and you can write this iPad off into the cost of that show, I think you're fine. I think if you're not doing $1 million show and you're playing some game on it, it may be a little bit of overkill. So it's all, as we say, depends. I think I'm going to break down. You did miss, by the way, one spec thing that you didn't talk about, which is that the 256 and the 500 gig come with a different processor than the 1 terabyte and the 2 terabyte. That they have downbinned for the smaller ones to a 9-core 10 GPU, whereas if you get the higher specs, you get a 10-core and 10 GPU. So if you want that extra core, you need to do all of that. I think I have one of these things. I didn't go for that, the big one. It is significantly different in terms of weight and feel than the other one. I mean, significantly different compared to a car, no. But compared to each other, it is much thinner. It is much lighter. I would tell you, I think the thing that people should be very careful of is the nano-texture glass. I think until you read about that and heard about that and seen how strong that is and whether you have to use their particular cloth to clean it or not, you really need to know that you want that, because that's $100 you'll be wiping off. But I suspect if you have the need and if you have the money, it's a lovely purchase.
And that nano-textured glass is all about reflections, and whether you're in a circumstance where you have controllable lighting where it may not give you anything, or we are in a situation where there are bad reflections and you want to control them. Let's go to Courtney Gooden. Courtney?
I also think it depends. It depends on if you want to impress your friends that you've got so much money, you can afford to waste $3,000 on an underpowered tablet. I find that sticking an American Express black card to your forehead with a little double stick tape works just as well. And if you want to get stuff done, you can come out a lot cheaper if you're willing to go into the Windows 11 world. This Lenovo Yoga 13-inch comes with a pencil. It can be a tablet. It has a keyboard included. It can be the tint mode. It can do all the other modes. It's a real laptop with a Ryzen 8-core processor. And it only is $544. So you could buy 5 of these for the price of that iPad. So if you're looking for productivity, not necessarily the way to go. Jason Snell had a lot of things to say about the new iPad on MacBreak Weekly, so take a look at that. He was not too complimentary. Mainly his problems have to do not necessarily with the build of the hardware, but with the fact that the software, the operating system just hasn't kept up and is not as productive as it could be.
And Alex?
I think if you're not an artist, it's not worth it. So I think that if you are an artist, it's probably it is an incredible. I mean, the pencil is a thing. Like, as someone who's been using some version of a Wacom or tablet for 30 years, that pencil made me want to buy it. I haven't bought it yet. Still recovering from NAB. I haven't bought it yet, but I am definitely getting close to buying it. I think that the keyboard's worth it. The pencil's worth it. The pencil will be the reason I bought it, if I buy it, or when I buy it. Cellular is not worth it. I never use cellular with these things. I can always hook it to my phone, which is right there if I need to, but I never bother. And the Nano-texture, I would never commit to that. You can get stickers that do that. Like, don't do that to your glass. And I would get probably the 1 terabyte, not the 2 terabyte of storage, but 1 terabyte of storage for it. I think that it's again, as an artist, if you are painting, the amount of control that you have in that pencil, that is no minor thing. There's a reason that they talked about it, is because it's an incredible amount of power that's in that pencil. And so as an artist, you might be interested in it. If you're not, if you're just going, then it's just another iPad. Like, if you're not doing, and Apple very carefully focused this entire thing on media professionals. Like, that's what the high-end iPad is really for media professionals. I think. I don't think there's any other reason to buy it. But the horsepower, the pen, all those things are all really driven, and I think you're going to probably, hopefully see that pen do more than what they showed there.
The barrel roll thing is interesting. So let's move on to the next question.
Tim Mann in Melbourne, Australia asks, I have set up a template in Resolve. Is there a way to export this to load onto my show recording machines?
Alex, what do you think?
I don't know if there's an official way to do templates, but I can tell you how I move things around. I set up something exactly the way I want it, or you already have. I save that out as a derp, or export it as a derp. I then take it into my other machine. I load it up. You can set it to read only, so the first time you want to save, it'll ask you what do you want to save it as, so you can't write over it. So it basically makes it a template. But that's how I move the files around. I don't know if there's a more official way to do that movement, but that's how I do it.
Hopefully that gave you some ideas. Tim, let's move to the next question.
Nigel Dessau in Austin, USA asks, so I am starting to play with GPT 4.0, and it takes some time to learn to converse with it. It didn't use the camera function. Is that just in beta, or did I miss something?
Nigel?
Yeah, so I saw the demo that everybody else did, and I've seen the various demos where, well, who just walked past me? And I've been playing with it. It is strange to learn to speak to an AI, but I don't know whether it's me or whether the camera feature is not enabled yet, so I thought I'd ask.
Let's go to Alex.
I'll have to take a look at it. I don't know if I've tested that yet. Mostly what I've been doing is just conversing with it, and I don't really do any work on it. Maybe because I'm so used to talking to AI things that maybe I'm shifting gears subconsciously, but I just sit there and just ask it questions all the time. I've now gotten into the habit of when I walk, when I'm taking my little walk, I have it on, and I just start asking random questions about things that pop into my head, and I get these little what appears to be not as much hallucination as I saw before. And so I think it's pretty powerful, but I haven't played with the camera enough to or haven't tried the camera. So we'll do more work on that. It was impressive. Are you talking about the camera that they used to do the math equation and
No, it was like, I saw one demo where like his wife or a lady comes and stands behind him, and like a minute later he says, who was that standing, but what just changed in my picture? And they go, somebody came behind you. You're wearing a red shirt. Oh. It's obviously there's a context thing that it can do by analyzing what it's seeing. And I haven't worked out how to, that I think is the breakthrough way to explain it to people. And I can't make that work.
Yeah, I haven't tried that yet. I know that just the conversing has been groundbreaking to me. Like the fact that I can just wander around, and every random question that pops into my head is a conversation that I can have with the machine. Like it's pretty amazing.
Let's head to the next question.
Douglas Carmichael asks, Yamaha's 2.0 firmware for the DM3 can split the USB connection into 4 devices, 3 stereo, 1 12-channel. Since Zoom can now address multi-channel devices directly, when might this be useful? And there's a little Yamaha YouTube video link there.
They're asking for some speculation. It looks like, Alexander, did you go down this path and see what's coming?
Yeah, I just watched the video. So this is actually, what they demonstrate in this video is actually a brand new driver mode. So it changes the way the driver operates. So instead of the operating system just seeing, all of the channels all at once, which doesn't work with Zoom because Zoom only sees the first 2 channels of your interface. You can actually now in Zoom, you can select different drivers. So if you're going to live stream, you would select the live stream driver that would be a stereo mix of all your inputs, for example. So this is very, very useful, completely separate from the multi-channel feature that you're talking about in Zoom. This is great for people that don't understand the technical routing of how programs like Loopback work and how to, because it's a bit daunting for someone who's never used Loopback. to get live stream audio into Zoom or another platform. So the multi-channel audio feature is still useful. So for example, like in my case, I've got a 32 output USB interface. So I can just go into Zoom and I can select, okay, I want these two channels, which are my mix minus back to Zoom. So that's still a very useful feature because not all mixers are going to have this type of multi-driver mode where you can select something that just does it for you.
And Courtney.
Yeah, the Rodecaster, sorry, there's a little pregnant pause there. The Rodecaster Pro has something like this. It has a single USB connection, but two separate USB channels. So in Zoom, you have Rodecaster Pro Primary, and you got Rodecaster Pro 2 Chat. So it's nice you can dedicate one set of USBs to be your main Zoom audio channel, and the other set of USBs can be your chat channel or your comms channel, so that you don't get the two mixed up and you don't have to deal with complex routing that would make sure that one is muted. That way you're sure that one doesn't go over the other. The Pro gives you 8 channels. I think the Chat gives you 2 channels. So it's something similar to what your Yamaha is doing. So it is useful in Zoom because it does separate out as multiple USB devices that can be assigned to individual programs.
Thank you. Let's go on to the next question.
Kyle Hammond in Chicago asks, what do you do to test your internet speed, home or vent, on a regular basis?
Ooh, speed testing. Jeffrey Powers, start us off.
So speed testing, there's a lot of depends on here. If you really want to get a good speed test, the first thing that you want to do is you want to unplug your network and start at bare bones. A lot of routers have the ability to do speed tests now, which I really don't trust too much. So I'll even unplug the router from the cable internet or the coax cable internet, whatever, and then just basically do a speed test, hook up the computer straight up to that modem line, and then do the speed test from there. When it comes to event stuff, the same thing. I will unplug everything and put one computer on and do a speed test from there. Of course, using Uka's speed test, that's the go-to for a lot of different testing systems right there.
And Nigel.
Yeah, I'm Ookla as well, but I will tell you that I use it from the Safari interface. So what I want to do when I'm speed testing is put myself in a consistent environment. So whatever device it is, I always go to the Safari or the web browser interface and use it from there. There are native versions that run on different machines, but I want to try and have a level set. The other thing is I always run it 3 times because in my experience, the average of the 3 is closer to the reality.
And Courtney.
I also, in the browser, usually in the Chrome browser, I'll run the Ookla, OOKLA bandwidth speed test because everyone seems to use that. It does allow you to change your server, and so you can test it with different servers on the back end to see that are available to your primary service area. So you can see which server gives you the best bandwidth, and it tests up and down. But you got to make sure that nothing else is running at the time. So that you get the true speed, internet speed connection of your router with the internet, and you're not tying it up with streaming somewhere in another room.
Jeff Keithley, you're on a lot of services. What do you think?
I've seen at certain locations there are a little bit of a lot of people use speedtest.net, which is the Ookla server setup. One thing you have to be careful on that is to make sure that you actually have a location that is indication of where you're going. So they allow you to set servers on it. So you want to make sure that the server that you are hitting as a speed test is as close to your entry point that you're actually sending the RTMP or the stream output if that's what you're doing. If you're just generally testing speed tests, it probably doesn't matter. It is a good indication of whether or not your network is at 100% or if you are having problems. We have found at times there may be a rogue on the network that's uploading a lot of content. usually Google Drive or Dropbox or something like that, that's just sitting there churning away. And they're like, we didn't even know because it was trying to do a sync the whole time. So we periodically will check that through the day when we're in production, but it's with everything on all at once a lot of times too. So we know where our limits are, not just where we want it to be, what the top is, but there's also another one called fast.com that we use alternatively between. Sometimes speedtest.net is not entirely accurate, as somebody's mentioned, and it's nice to have a backup, and fast.com is a pretty good backup. Just be careful about, as Jeffrey said, don't use the one built into the router, because they entirely 99.9% of the time will do speed tests and it looks like it's great, but they're hitting their own server. They're hitting their own network server instead of across the internet. So that's a false.
You're saying they're playing a little inside baseball there. Interesting. Jeffrey Powers, you wanted to come back in on this?
Yeah, last thing is definitely you do a speed test. If you're going to YouTube, I go to find the server, the server closest to YouTube, which is usually Google's. If you're going to Facebook, you find out where that's going. Do a trace route on your network to make sure how many hops it takes to get from one server to the other, and you'll be able to figure out where you're going from there. That's going to be a big difference in how your video is going to go from point A to point B.
I remember doing a trace route once, and I went, why am I going to Bangladesh to get across town? It's a fascinating process. Let's go on to the next question.
Next question is from Robert Shoji in Los Angeles. For video recording, what criteria should I use to determine what SD card video speed class to purchase? V30 versus V60 versus V90? Thank you.
Alex, dive in.
Fastest you can find. It's never going to be, an SD card's never going to be fast enough for you to get what you need. For me anyway, it depends on what your speeds are. You're going to have to look at what its transfer speeds are. But generally, I would say the fastest you can find. Because you're going to spend money on this, and then your needs are going to keep on growing. I would not get something that wasn't twice as fast as 4K 60 captured at Apple ProRes HQ. So that would be like table stakes of that. I don't remember what the speed is exactly per second, but it's a lot. It's probably, but I would, most of the stuff that I've gotten, I get the fastest chips that I can get when I buy them.
Yeah, you want the least number of chips in the pile or cards in the pile of these are the ones that no longer do anything that I can use them for because I bought them 10 years ago and they're now absolutely worthless. There's still so much advancement in memory cards, memory chips, memory form factors that there's always something newer and faster coming out. And boy, you don't want to be stuck with a bunch of media that you really can't do anything other than maybe give somebody a text file on. Let's go down to the next question.
Paul Walhus is back from Austin, Texas. Would any of these high Z microphones work on the Lewitt Connect 2 or 6 high Z input? AT-DB125, Shure 545 SD, Electro-Voice 635A.
Oh, I've still got a 635A in my mic hammer/microphones collection. Alexander, what do you think?
Yeah, so, first of all, the Electro-Voice 635A is just a balanced low impedance. So just to be clear, high Z means high impedance. So why would you need a microphone with a high impedance output? Well, if you've got a guitar amp which has a high impedance input, you're not going to be able to get much level out of that dynamic microphone if you just plug it in with, say, a straight up XLR to quarter-inch jack. You need that impedance transformer to go from the low impedance to the much, much higher impedance to get anything out of it. One thing I just want to, I would caution you with these interfaces, typically a single channel audio interface like the Connect 2, which has a microphone preamp, XLR input, and a quarter-inch high impedance input. It's an either or. It's not two at the same time. Those are not discrete channels. So if what you're trying to do is have a microphone and a high impedance input working at the same time, that usually will not work. So just be careful, just double check the manual, but you typically need 2 discrete channels. So you'd have guitar on one channel, microphone on the other channel. The Shure, it looks like it does actually have a selectable switch where you can go from low to high impedance. So if you did have a guitar amp and you wanted to use that 545 direct, you could just flip the switch and then just get a cable that goes from XLR to 1/4 inch TS unbalanced.
Courtney Gooden.
Yeah, Alexander covered everything really well. Yeah, high impedance. The Electro-Voice is a balanced XLR connector on it, and it does that. That Lewitt Connect does have a balanced input on it in the XLR, and it does have a instrument input, and a lot of times the instrument input is just a bridging input across that input transformer to give you the high impedance. So you'd have to check out the schematic of that and whether or not those microphones are actually high impedance or if they come out with balanced output, low impedance. Most microphones are in the 200 to 600 ohm range, but there are some high impedance microphones, but usually they're like crystal microphones that are not dynamic microphones.
I haven't used a crystal microphone in 40 years. That's interesting. Let's move on to the next question.
Zach Stahlsmith from Chautauqua, New York asks, how soon after hardware, software, or firmware updates come out do we feel it's safe to upgrade a setup? After the first few patches, right away?
Ooh, we're not supposed to talk religion, but here we go. Nigel, dive in.
So, of course, it depends. If you believe that software fix patch update will fix a problem in a machine that you have, you may want to do it sooner rather than later. If you are in a frozen production environment where everything is working, you may want to wait until after that. If it's a device you don't much care about whether it's working or not, you can do it anytime you want. So I think you've got to decide what the rules are for you. I think the only overlay I would add on top of that is, well, there are occasions of every manufacturer messing one of these things up. Some people are better at messing it up than others. And so you should go by the history of the vendor in your experience and whether when they release a patch or an update, it's better to test it. A good example would be, I generally, put the iPad updates on the moment they come out, but my Macs that use Dante, I wait until somebody else has made that work.
Alexander Knight.
Yeah, more along the same lines for me. With specific for firmware, when I buy a new piece of hardware, the first thing I check is what firmware has shipped on that. And the first thing I will do is, especially if it's woefully out of date and they've fixed a lot of bugs, added a lot of new features, I will just straight up upgrade the firmware. Now, once I've upgraded the firmware on that new hardware and I've integrated it into my production workflow, I'm not going to update the firmware just for the sake of updating new firmware unless I'm experiencing a specific bug or there's a new feature that's being added and I really, really want that feature. And of course, I will never update the firmware before anything important. So I usually give myself, 2 to 3 weeks to make sure, before I'm doing anything critical that I need to use that piece of hardware, I make sure that I don't have that stuff going on. Otherwise, because if it gets bricked or something else happens and that's my only piece of hardware, like if it's a mixer, for example, and that's my only mixer, you don't want that thing failing right before you got to do a gig.
Absolutely. Jeffrey Powers.
There's been a couple times where I'd had a problem during production, and during production, the one thing that's suggested is doing a software firmware update, and that's when I will risk it at that point in time. There are some devices that I have that are fairly cheap, and I know I have one device that I have. You do a firmware update, and you instantly have to do the firmware update once again to get it to work. It's kind of weird, but it works. And then the other thing is, if you really need to do a firmware software update, there are Reddit subreddits out there that are just basically they'll bear all and they'll say how it works and how it doesn't work. So give it like 10-15 minutes, and then those threads start to fill up, and then just read all the comments and see if it's worth making the risk yourself.
And Courtney Gooden.
Yeah, I'm always of the school, if it's not broke, don't try and fix it. That if something is working and fulfilling all my tasks and it's very stable, I won't really do a firmware update. unless there's something new that's offered that I am really anxious to use or solve some problem that I'm going to need. And then in that case, I'll give myself plenty of time before the next event or place where I have to use it professionally. And I also want to make sure that I have the files on hand to be able to roll back in case there is a problem. Things that madden me are like television sets that auto-update themselves if they're hooked up to Wi-Fi or over the internet if you're streaming somewhere, and they load a new version of the firmware in without asking you and eliminate a lot of the old features that you used to have. Drives me nuts.
Jeff Keithley, you work in complex setups. What's your update process?
I used to be a very, very early adopter. As I've gotten older and lost all my hair, I do less and less of that. I usually kind of wait for things to shake down. But I do want to caution, the number one thing is never, ever, 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 as many times as you want to say that, do a firmware update right before show. Ever, ever, ever.
I think everybody here has been bit at some point about, oh, there's a new one, I'll just toss it in, and then, oh dear.
Yeah, that's the worst time of ever to do that. So never, ever, ever. The only other thing I would say is that, and I caution this to everybody out there, is make sure as we move to more of a software-based type of workflows, it is imperative to keep all your machines that you have connected. Like I have 30, 40 machines here in our offices. Keep them all on the same version of NDI. Keep them all on the same version of Dante. The Dante's virtual sound card, we had to use a very specific version for years because Livestream Studio would never update their stack in order to be able to use the later versions. It broke, and so we couldn't use Dante Virtual Sound Card except for that old version. And whenever I was speaking with somebody at Dante, and they're like, why in the world would you use that? It's got so many bugs. I'm like, well, it's because it's the only thing that works with this software. They're like, a week later, they pressured them to fix it. So it was taking the manufacturer to pressure the vendor to update their software in order to be able to use the later versions. But that's the one thing I would suggest. I'm working with a studio now, and I found all their Dante devices were severely out of date. And we're going through and in between shows trying to update those firmwares and such too. It is okay to keep up with it. I don't feel like you need to be updating the day it comes out, but still definitely keep up with them.
Having recently been snickered at because I was talking to somebody about my comms, and my version of Unity, I think was it you, Jeff? It was like 7 years old or 10.
Yeah, yours was, I think, version -4 or something like that.
It was some early beta. It was working. Every day I went on, everything it functioned for me. I was never updating it, but boy, when it finally hit me, it hit me because I was completely incompatible with everything else everybody else was using. So there's always this balance of I need to move forward and not get too far behind. But as everybody is articulating here, if you get out on the bleeding edge of updates, boy, it can snap you. And sometimes when there's money on the line, that is not a good thing. Let's move on to the next question.
Douglas Carmichael asks, when I updated my Yamaha DM3 mixer to 2.0 firmware, the Dante module firmware update failed because I didn't have the console connected to a Dante network. Has anyone had a similar experience with other Yamaha models?
Alexander, you raised your hand first.
I haven't had similar experience, but first thing, you can always contact Yamaha tech support because they can give you an answer, but it always pays to read the documentation for your firmware because it actually says here in the update procedure there that if you get a Dante update error, it may appear. It says, in this case, connect another network device to the Dante primary port and follow the update guidelines. If no other network devices are available, avoid the error by connecting the Dante primary port and network port on the DM3. So if you continue to have issues, you may want to contact Yamaha about that.
Jeff Keithley?
There's never a reason for me not to have my Dante connected to my network. It's kind of the whole point. Dante controller is also a great way to manage and look at all your different firmwares for your different Dante devices. As I mentioned just a minute ago, it's like we have a studio and I can look in there and see all the different Avio devices that are out of date, even the couple Yamahas that are there. And I just want to caution you, is this is one place for sure you want to tread lightly, and you want to make sure you don't do it before a show or before you absolutely need it. But you need to have your network connected on the Dante side, primary side and secondary, but primary is the most important. Make sure it's connected on the primary side, and then push the Dante update at that point.
Let's move to the next question.
Next question is from David Brady in New York City. What are the most useful video scopes to provide into a utility Zoom room? I've got my Nobe machine tuned up.
Alex, do you want to dive into this?
Yeah, RGB parade. I mean, that's the most important one. You're not going to really get accurate. So the vector scope is not going to be as accurate as you need to. The Luma scope doesn't really give you the kind of data you need. Liju and those types of things aren't necessarily, that's actually audio there. So, but I would say that the false color may be something that you're interested in. There's a false color reading there. But the other one is the real one that I pay the most attention to is the RGB parade. And the reason for that is that you may have something that across a general luminance scope looks fine, but you're slamming the red channel or the blue channel or something else. And so the RGB parade tells you that you're peaking in a specific channel as opposed to the overall average of those channels. And so the one that, if I'm going to pick one, that's the one that I'm going to pick. The false color would probably be my second one, where you can just kind of glance over at something and see if something's way off. So I think those are the two that I would probably pay the most attention to.
Let's move to the next question.
Paul Wall, who's from Austin, Texas, asks, at WWDC, do you think Apple will try to match any Google I/O announced Gemini features like Ask Photos, Circle to Search, AI-powered math, and scam call monitoring powered by AI?
Ooh, Apple prognosticating. Let's dive in. Nigel, what do you think?
If they do, they're not going to say because Google did it first. My guess is that Apple's known for a long time what it was going to do. It will have watched the Google announcement and spotted that every third word was AI, and it will decide it's not going to do likewise. I think what you'll see from Apple, it will separate out a couple of ideas. One, machine learning, which is a set of technologies that help them develop products. And then AI, which I think they will talk about, and even on the iPad announcement, they mentioned it a couple of times, which help users do something. And so I think they're going to be very focused on what they're doing in their operating platforms to make the usage scenarios that they believe are important to users easy for developers to develop for. And I think that will be the focus.
Jeffrey Powers.
Yeah, I totally agree. You know, Apple runs its own marathon, and it has to, because Google's running a separate type of marathon, and they're doing a lot of different things. I don't know if you caught this at the beginning of the Google keynote a couple days ago. The DJ Mark Rebellet, he basically said, Siri, open Google. And that's part of the whole thing, is you're running a lot of Google on your Apple, but you're not running a lot of Apple on other systems. And that's by design here. So there's going to be a couple of things that they're going to say, yeah, that's probably easy to do. We could definitely do it. And I really hope that they do it for the photos, because I want to have a better sorting feature. I'd love them to do something with music, because that's just a mess to try and to get songs that I want to hear over my ears. The scam calling thing is the other thing, and I'm really concerned about that, and how it's helping with security, but there can be a lot of false positives on that, especially when a phone number starts to change hands, or somebody says something that the AI starts to think that they said something, but it's not really what they said. So I think Apple's going to take those a little bit slower to try and figure out how can we do it right.
Alexander Knight.
Yeah, more along the lines of what everyone says. You know, I try to curb my expectation at these events, because Apple historically is never the kind of company to be the first to market with any particular new product. And so when it comes to AI features, if they have new AI features, which I'm sure they will, with, anything to do with machine learning and neural networks and all that sort of stuff, which they've been doing for a while now. It's not like in the last 12 months they've suddenly decided, oh my God, we got to come to market with some AI features. This stuff, if it's going to come out in June, they've been working on this stuff for probably a few years now. So I'm going to curb my expectations. I think that whatever they come out with will not be as feature complete or as robust as what a lot of these other companies like OpenAI are developing, but whatever they come out with will probably be fairly decent. I don't know if we're going to get a complete replacement to Siri this year, although everyone knows, and I'm sure people working inside Apple are well aware of how antiquated Siri is in comparison to the kind of conversational nature you can now have with GPT-4. So we'll see what happens.
Alex.
Yeah, I have ChatGPT 4.0 on my iPhone, and it works great. Like that's the problem. I mean, that's why Apple is not really in a rush, is because Google is primarily a software company. Microsoft is primarily a software company. They have to keep up with the Joneses because someone could move from their software to somebody else's software. Apple has a bunch of hardware users that aren't going anywhere. So the chances of no one's going to move. Maybe somebody's going to move, but very few people. It'll be a rounding error of people that are willing to move from their iPhone to an Android phone because the AI is better. Like the chances of that happening, given that all these AI tools are available on the iPhone in some way, shape, or form, there's just no rush for Apple to do anything. So they're going to probably talk about AI. They've talked a little bit about it on the last one, but I don't think it's nearly. I think what they're going to be looking for is how do we make your job, how do we make your life a little bit easier, and how do we take advantage of the fact that we have an enormous amount of data that's on your phone, and we have a processor that can process it on your phone. So the things that I do think, the things like Ask Photos, looking at your how you search things through your own mail, how you do things that are on the phone. How does it look at your health data and give you data on your phone? How do developers have things that Apple can probably build things where they're taking advantage of AI but not getting all the data so that the user still has privacy, but the developer can do cool things. These are all things that Apple could make available for that process. As far as scam calls, I don't really care about false positives because I don't want anyone to call me. So anyway, I have mine is on Do Not Disturb. Like literally, my entire system is on Do Not Disturb unless I'm expecting you to call me. Unless you tell me I'm going to call you at this time. Like if you tell me I'm going to call you at 2, I open up my Do Not Disturb to a focused mode, which is only numbers that are in my system at 1:55. And then I turn. As soon as we're done with our call, I close it back up again because phone calls are the death of thinking.
Let's move on to Courtney. Sorry about that, Courtney.
I was just wondering. I don't have the iPhone, but for those of you that do, they've had that NPU out since the 15, right? That's had that processor. Have they announced any software that uses those NPU cores for anything yet?
Well, that's how long Apple's been thinking about this. So I think that there are some processors that some of the things that it does automatically that are using the neural cores. So there are things that it's doing to make your job easier. Again, what it's really good at, if you look at what it was making available in the iPad, some of the iPad demos, those are things that are using that neural core. But I think that again, they've been building that into. Apple will have a tendency to build things into the hardware so that when they make announcements, the last 4 or 5 generations can do some of those things along with it. So it's not only the new one. So,
but it may take a firmware update or a software update to the next version of the operating system, iOS, to utilize it.
It may be able to use it right now. It's just that there's not any software hooks inside of Xcode. It's not even a firmware update. It's just libraries. This is just and the libraries really exist. It's more showing people what those libraries can do. Is more of that, but it's all there. Same thing with, there's incredible. Apple tends to overbuild all the hardware so that you can keep on scaling for quite some time. When they really started pushing Dolby Atmos and Vision, it was 4 or 5 years into every piece of hardware. It was not something that they had. Oh, we just announced it, so now 1%, because Apple doesn't like to develop something for 1 million people. They want to develop something for 100 million people. And so they want to have that all embedded into that hardware before they start announcing what it can do. So that's what they've been kind of, I think that's what they've been doing for a while.
Let's go to the next question.
Eric Price in Kansas City asks, is there an easy way when working in a multicam timeline in Resolve to include a picture-in-picture segment using 2 of the camera angles simultaneously, or must this be done using a timeline with multiple video tracks?
Alex, you use Resolve. What do you think?
The only way I would do it was with multiple video tracks. I don't think there's any way with a timeline with a multi. I think you would need to. Mickey says you use a nested pip sequence as one of the sources in the multicam, so that could work. So you could do that. I probably wouldn't do it that way, just because it would make me crazy to have it all embedded into it. So if I wanted to do that, I would build it as a separate input. But I can see how Mickey's approach would work.
Let's go to the next question.
Guy Cochran in Seattle asks, how did we learn from the fireside chat?
And for those of you who might not be aware of it, Alex has been doing a series of fireside chats in the not actually in the evening, all over the place. The schedule has been a little, but they are so fascinating. He's talking to some of the industry luminaries. He did Emery Wells yesterday. It was a fascinating discussion. And if you want to know a little bit about the Frame.io kind of distribution things, to be able to spend an hour listening to Emery just talk about what his thinking is and how he developed it from the beginning, it was fascinating. Before that, we did Andy Carluccio of Zoom, and Alex talked to him at length about the Zoom kind of idea and about where he came from. And so they're really fascinating. So Alex, what do you think? What do you got planned here, and what's kind of happening?
Yeah, so we're going to keep on doing these. We had the conversation yesterday with Emery, I thought was fantastic, and we had a great time. And he really walked through. I didn't realize that I had met him as he was just getting started. He was in Pixel Core many, many years ago, and just as he was just before he was even building his first company, and it was really, really great to talk through that journey. I think that it's really interesting to hear how people get to where they are, because I think it gives us a sense of what it takes to actually do that. And I think that, and he was great. He said, this is. He goes, this is what we told investors, but here's the deal. Here's why we created this product, or this is how we did this. So when we were raising money,
here's the real
said
story.
One thing, but this is it. And he gave us the real deal yesterday. And so really, really great conversation. I highly recommend checking it out. We have a shelf now in the YouTube space where you can see fireside chat starting to come up. We're just getting it started. It's a big experiment in a bunch of different ways. One is I watch Michael Krasny do all these great interviews, and I just really wanted to do something. I was like, I have people that I'd like to interview, and I also wanted to be able to be flexible. Like, so we have we were able to kind of work with Andy and Colleen. Were in the evenings. Emery was yesterday afternoon. I have another one scheduled tentatively for next Thursday evening. We'll do the announcement a little later. But we're kind of, and the key is that, like, for instance, the person that I gave them a choice of being on our show in the morning or having something in the evening. They were like, 7:30 in the morning is really early. So anyway, so for them, and so they there's not really not there, and so it's allowing me to kind of work around schedules with some folks to have them in there. And so I'm also experimenting with the workflow. So one of the things I want to do is build a light show where I learn a lot by doing it. So the show is really done, typically, yesterday's, because of a bunch of movement and everything else, was really done all by me. But normally we would have Laura or someone else managing questions on the back end, and making that work. And it's allowing me to think about how our Q&A process works, and how there's a bunch of things that we're kind of, figuring out, in that process. So anyway, so that's what we're, that's what we're working on there. I'm learning a little bit about that process. I'm doing these in Nemo Live to make these all work. And I've got a little controller, and I keep on adding things and moving things around. And so I think that it's a good learning process for me, but it's also great. Some really, really great interviews that I'm really excited to do. So I don't know. I'm not promising a certain day. I'm not promising them every week. I'm just like, around the schedule that I can work with guests, and I can work with my own schedule. We're kind of working through that. So.
Let's go on to the next question.
Next question's from Douglas Carmichael. Would you switch from Claude 3 Opus to GPT-4 for writing/narrative tasks?
What do you think, Alex?
I can't say because I haven't used it. I really have been, I'm too busy to go look at every single AI solution out there right now, whether it's Claude or Gemini or whatever. So I have a tendency to pick one that I think is going to work pretty well. And so really my whole workflow has really been built around ChatGPT, ChatGPT-4 and ChatGPT 4.0 now. And so I haven't really experimented wider than that.
And Nigel.
Yeah, I'm ChatGPT 4 just because I know ChatGPT. The other thing I think when it comes to writing stuff, the only overlay I add on top of that is Grammarly, which is I use Grammarly as the place where I assemble stuff. And I find that and its AI engine, which, by the way, I think uses some of ChatGPT as well, is really useful to keep a consistent voice between you and what you're bringing in from other sources.
And we are about to head up to the top of the hour, and I'm having a little bit of equipment problem here, so I'm going to just note that in just a minute we're going to be moving to talk about lenses, the glass that all of our images have to pass through to make our content. That is going to be in our second hour today. Tomorrow's show, CJ is going to be doing Foundational Friday brainstorming. Saturday, we're going to be doing a full day of Q&A. And on Sunday, don't forget, that's kind of our behind-the-scenes conversation about how office hours work. So if you want to learn something about that, that's Sunday. And don't forget, in after hours, many days the main show is done. If every day we talk about things in after hours. So all of this is how the show operates. It is entirely driven by your questions. So if you have questions about lenses, now's a good time to use those QR codes or to get into the system. And we're going to be right back after this.